Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today, we're with a special guest, Suman. Can you introduce yourself?
Tony, nice to be here. Suman Kanuganti. I'm the co-founder CEO of Personal AI. I'm an engineer by background and have been having a lot of fun building in AI for the past decade.
We're seeing AI companies hit a wall with scaling laws. Training costs are exploding while performance gains are diminishing. Is the era of, just make it bigger officially over and, what's going to replace it?
Wow, fascinating topic to begin with. Yes, I would consider the way to think about it is there is a set of use cases and desire for the large language models, and there is a use cases and set of desires for small language models. So when we think about scaling laws, it's more about scaling what, and then you have to apply the specific types of laws. So I don't know if the statement that LLMs are useless is a appropriate statement as much as we are getting sophisticated to identify what kind of models, what kind of scaling, what kind of sizing is necessary to what kind of use cases and what you're trying to solve.
And you're in the business of this thing called the no LM movement. What exactly is the no LM movement trying to kill, and like what comes after?
It tries to attack the very statement that you opened up with, Tony, which is the scalability of LLMs behind us now? So the intention of the no LLM is LLMs serve a specific purpose, a very intelligent but loses the grounded nature of what specialized knowledge needs to be. So our intention of no LLM campaign is more centered around LLMs is not one size fits all for every use case, for every problem that you are trying to solve with the AI, as much as there are alternate approaches. There are programmable ways of small models. There are high precision that different approaches will give you for specialized use cases. There are more private ways of doing things as well, more scalable ways of doing things as well. So our push always has been our architecture, which is designed around capturing the intelligence and predicting the decisions from an individual perspective, right? So our architecture has been like small language models. Specifically, we focus on personal language model because there is an identity component to the models that we do. So yeah, so no LLM is more targeted towards think beyond LLM instead of thinking about, oh, we hate LLM. It's the point is more about let's apply our thinking and our mindset beyond LLMs.
And I know every enterprise right now says that they want AI, but most are still just using ChatGPT, for instance, for like mail drafts.
Yeah.
So, like, what's the real barrier preventing, say, these companies from getting actual like return on investment from AI investments?
Yeah, we do see a lot of customers already using some version of the LLMs, right? Either it be Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT Pro, they have some enterprise licenses. So access to the large language models is not a problem anymore, right? Most every university, most every company has some version of access to the LLMs. The interesting is every business is unique in their own ways, right? And every business has unique sets of use cases and problems. Now, there are companies who are specialized in picking up a specific vertical, picking up specific sets of use cases, and solving those specific use cases within a industry, right? That defines a hundreds of startups who are trying to do that. But at the same time, there are sets of use cases that are not solvable by the LLM. So when we talk to our customers, LLMs are accessible, they are here. And then you have to build a whole bunch of different infrastructure components to get to a point where you are actually solving their use cases. That may be anywhere from like in a technical jargon, your RAG pipeline or vector pipeline, the memory databases, the relationship memory. How do you do access controls, data management, a whole set of things that goes in it. So the speed at which the AI transformation is happening for the enterprise is how fast they're able to actually solve their internal sets of use cases that is likely dependent on internal sets of data that is very subject to how the company has historically grown and actually putting it in practice is where the journey currently lies. At least that's what we are seeing right now.
So right now, like the AI industry seems to be split between artificial general intelligence in 2 years and specialized tool camps. As someone who's like building these specialized models, where do you see these two areas going?
Yeah, it is indeed different schools of thoughts, right? When we started personal AI back in 2020, right, our core mission was very simple, which is we want to address the problem of what would Tony do? What would Suman do? What would Jim do from an individual perspective? So there is a thought around this artificial general intelligence, which is know it all mindset, right? That definitely maps very well into the architecture of a large language model and as well as the practices of a large language model, which is the more data and the variety of data goes into one single model that can answer everything for you. I would foresee a world the AGIs are more mapped to the institutional ways of doing like mainframes, for example. Back in the days, we had these mainframes and there's an institution behind it. So we could anticipate an AGI for United States, an AGI for India, or the AGI for China, right? There could be much more, the boundaries of the AGI could be more centered around the political and the region specific activities. Our school of thought is the opposite, which is more centered around artificial personal intelligence, like artificial like individual intelligence, like predicting the ability of how a individual human thinks and what they are likely to do, right? The decision making engine. So if you get to the core of the intelligence part itself, AGI solves for having the general intelligence and being able to make the decisions in a much more broader perspective. And artificial personal intelligence is more tailored towards making the decisions from an individual perspective. And I think both of them do exist. In today's world, I would consider the idea of cloud computing is more targeted for AGI. And the idea of the personal computers that you have sitting on your desk is more kind of geared towards artificial personal intelligence, which is more small language models, what they solve.
So these large LLM vendors like OpenAI like reportedly burnt $5 billion annually. Anthropic and others are like raising billions of dollars. Is the current AI business model fundamentally broken, and like what needs to change?
One thing that needs to change is the payloads or the use cases that we are trying to solve fundamentally need to like the architecture mindset has to shift from LLM to LLM plus an alternate architecture. That's what is the plug for me and my personal AI, which is more tailored towards when you have a specific use case, you can ground that specific use case into these tiny models that are 10x more efficient and cheaper and scalable and much more precise, much more private, much more programmable. So that way you do not have to waste the tokens associated with a large language model that are more inefficient. Again, the idea of the inefficiencies when we compare that back to the a mainframe is real. Mainframes used to draw like tons and tons of power, right? Until you got to the idea of using a personal computer, which draws small amounts of power, which compartmentalizes the amount of compute and the power that is needed and still solves 90% of your problems, right? So, yeah, so I think the evolution will have two technological advancements. One, yes, LLMs will continue to drive more efficiency. So the per token cost and the per token footprint will continue to reduce. That's the nature of the technological advancements anyway. However, in addition to that, we don't just rely on one technological advancement of cost per token as much as you start thinking through alternate approaches such as small language models to be able to solve specific problems that has lower footprint, that has higher performance than compared to the traditional methods of LLM. And I don't think anything is wrong in here. I think it's the market evolution and the industry evolution. And now, like the collective set of smart people are coming together and thinking through these problems. And personally, I started as focusing on a problem which is not targeted or geared towards solving by LLM. Fundamentally, there is a need of privacy in here, the need of the context rich associated with is an individual, a specific role. So we have those advantages built in into the architecture and baked into the architecture, which is now we are meeting where the market is, right? And one of the reasons why we are having this conversation now.
And then like right now, everyone's worried about AI replacing jobs. We're all talking about AI workers collaborating with humans. So what does like a realistic human slash AI workplace actually look like moving forward?
I will give you my perspective, specifically what we see in our deployments. We are deploying these tiny small models. We refer to them as AI personas that could be very specific to a role inside a company, or that could be based on a specific expert employee as well, right? The roles and employees could be anywhere from a corporate strategy to a supply chain manager to an inventory manager to a CFO or to Bob who knows it all inside a company and has that subject matter expert knowledge. We have envisioned AI 5 years ago as a mechanism or a way to work alongside with people. So a lot of our design and the UX and the experience and the HCI methods has been around creating these AI personas that collaborate with people, just like people collaborate with people in a communication-like setting. For example, Tony and Suman in a company setting communicates with each other. We do work ourselves offline, and then we come back and then we collaborate back again, right? And that is the platform approach that we have taken to the AI. And that also is giving us an advantage of what does access control mean when you talk about AI in a company. In our perspective, because these personas are fundamentally tied to employees and roles, it adapts to the existing access control systems that enterprise companies already have. So does it create a level of collaboration for greater efficiency? Yes. Does the jobs shift? Yes. Would people have to think through different ways of upskilling to the point where humans are more needed for their brilliance and their strategy and their decision? Yes. So it basically offers us a mechanism to upskill the a generation, if you will, from internet to the now AI internet.
So what's cool is like there's a lot of like very large companies like Apple, for instance, that are now running models on device, which I think is awesome. So your iPhone now is able to run language models. OpenAI is like pushing for bigger cloud, which is on the opposite side, opposite end of the scale.
Yep.
And you're advocating for like company specific models. So like where does AI inferencing actually end up living on that scale?
In the long run, it should be distributed, right? And that's when we get greater economies of scale with any inference per token. There is compute already out there, right? The internet was most useful when personal computers were accessible to the people. The AI will be most useful when the inference will happen on the devices that is sitting in your pockets. It is true that that's a journey, that's a technological journey that we would have to invest and we would have to get to the point where they need to run. My perspective has always been a very distributed approach. We never invested in training a large language model. In fact, back in 2022, we were in the same Microsoft corporate development offices alongside with large language model conversations with OpenAI. That time we were advocating for small language models because we were going after specific use cases. Clearly, the winner was large language models in 2023. And 2 years later, the work that we are doing is filling a specific purpose, which is a highly distributed way of running your specific models on the devices, on the edge systems that infrastructure already supports. So you have much more distributed inferencing rather than one single cloud, if you will. And I don't think it will stop there. It will continue to become more and more tinier. Even if you start thinking about IoT devices, there are billions of IoT devices out there. They may be small right now in terms of their power, like in terms of CPU, but there is investments that are happening on crunching that footprint of the GPUs as well. That becomes like IoT GPUs, right? So this is no different than evolution of our x86 traditional CPU architecture and then GPU architecture. Now it's like AI architecture to a larger degree because the kind of compute is uniquely different, and now there is more demand for it.
And then in terms of like open source, I'm a
Mhm.
big open source guy. So the open source community says AI should be free and open, while the big labs say safety requires closed source models. We're like, where do you stand on like open source versus the closed source debate, and like how does PLMs fit in?
PLMs are closed source. My background is open source. The school of thought, I would question why would it be any different than an open source Linux kernel versus a operating system behind the scenes such as an Apple or Windows, right? Either one is good or bad? No. Will open source model define the accessibility and democratization of some of these models? to people in areas for more innovation? Yes. When I was 20 years old, pretty much I started off my kernel development on Linux 5.1, only to realize there is a company called Red Hat who also has a little bit more closed version of the open source product, and you have a much more rigor and support associated with the enterprise applications, right? So there are choices that enterprise companies will make that are a little bit more closed, so that way they are more security, more the strength of control within their ecosystem, within their platforms. However, there are open source that startup companies will build on top of for both of cost reasons as well as flexibility reasons. So the choice is important, and I think choice needs to exist. So it's not either or, it's more about what applications will make sense to adapt to open source models versus what applications or use cases will make sense for relying on something more proprietary.
Now, in terms of just regulation, Europe's got their own AI Act. California has their own regulations. There's like enterprise compliance requirements. Is from all these, is the regulatory environment actually pushing companies towards like smaller controlled models like PLMs by default?
One of the biggest advantages of personal AI is just that. We are very pro in regards to the data stewardship, right? It goes back into the fundamental core principles of how the internet may have evolved. There are different reasons for it. Social media has evolved for different reasons. The business model has evolved by being opportunistic about it. Now, there is lots of things have evolved in our traditional SaaS and traditional internet businesses. And now there is AI. Clearly, we all know AI requires data, and that means there is aggregation of data, motivations that are helpful for certain platforms. And there is also a desire to protect their own very information and the data that individuals possess as well as companies possess. I'm in the, I play in the industry to give companies, to give individuals a mechanism to do the latter, which is being able to protect your data, but still take the advantage of your AI. So the business model is not based on platforms leveraging your data and using the same traditional business models as ad businesses, right? So the business models will shift. So from my perspective, going forward, we should have a lot more respect, a lot more consent-driven experiences for not only consumers, but also for businesses to be able to control and leverage and use their IP, their work. And I think fundamental value proposition over there is respect.
Now, every company claims that their AI is like privacy preserving right now. So if you were like to cut through the marketing, what's the actual difference between the privacy theater and like actual
Yeah, good
private
question.
AI systems?
There are two ways to address that. One is technology, and the other is legality. From a technology perspective, the architecture of the PLMs, you have a specific memory that is associated with a specific persona. And in under zero circumstances, that memory that belongs to one persona is either shared with other persona or shared with a large language model. So that's guaranteed in terms of fundamentally not a security, but as much as it's a design by privacy baked into the architecture itself. The most interesting thing is when we talk about like privacy and the security, right? Security is more like you're preventing a threat. Privacy is fundamentally you are protecting the underlying data associated with value that you are trying to create. Long story short, from a technological perspective, given these are small self-contained units of data, the control mechanics and the secure mechanics are much more rigorous and controlled by the individual people or laptops, and the impact of a invasion is limited, right? It's not widespread. So that's like a technological response to that. The legal response is there's always this fine prints when you start looking at the legal language on how you are going to use the data or not going to use the data. And this is one challenge as a company. I had a lot to work with my own legal people that no, that is not, we want to give legally the ownership of the data and the model to the customers who are leveraging this platform, and we want to sell the platform. We are selling a mechanism or a means to the companies to basically create their own intelligence, but we do not want their intelligence. The company does not accrue this intelligence. It was quite confusing. I won't be primarily because the traditional ways of doing the licensing of the data is so unique and different. When you start thinking about Suman, that doesn't make any sense. It makes sense. We are doing a different business model here. So if you go look at personal.ai slash privacy, personal.ai slash terms of service, you will clearly see who legally owns that data.
And if you could force one change on how the AI industry operates today, like either from a technical standpoint, business model, or like cultural, like what would it be and why?
I would go with the cultural. It's a very delicate balance to certain decisions could be very economic driven and economic focus. We are in a capitalist society and country, which is fundamentally great. And at the same time, it would be a shame to do the same mistakes that we have done in the past and aggregating pretty much the idea of the value of what internet has to offer into few companies. Fundamentally, there has to be like a cultural difference in the shift that needs to happen in the AI, where the aggregation of the value is not going into top 10 companies. It may be top 1,000 companies. The value of the AI is not just being used as much as the value of the AI is used to create. Overall, I would favor the economic interest of the AI in the long run will be much more fruitful, creating multiple multi-billion dollar businesses instead of $10 trillion businesses. So I think there's a cultural shift that needs to happen there.
So 5 years ago, nobody predicted that ChatGPT would be so popular and be used by so many people. Like, what's the equivalent surprise coming in, say, the next 5 years that no one's talking about today?
In all reality, though, a lot of decision making as well as a lot of automation. I don't know if I can name like one person, sorry, not one person or one company, as much as there is a clear trend on how the next generation of human interaction with the computers are going to evolve. What do I mean by that? People are generally used to communicating with each other by sitting in front of them and talking to each other. If it was not for hacking our way out, interacting with the computers, we wouldn't have these mouses or keyboards, right? That's not our natural way of doing things. So one prediction is around how many interactions with the computer will happen naturally without having to use your keyboard or mouse. And I think that idea or that vision is very fascinating with the AI, where we can likely get rid of sitting in front of computers to do jobs. And I think that's coming faster than we would imagine.
And then just to wrap things up, final question. The industry right now keeps using terms like intelligence,
Mhm.
reasoning, for instance. They're very popular terms. What are essentially like statistical models. Are we like kind of lying to ourselves about what AI actually is, and does it really matter?
I don't know if it matters as long as it's creating value. We refer to our personal AIs as the decision-making engines. What does it mean, right? We start talking about the use cases then, okay, if you have a loan processor persona that is very specific to a bank and how they do their business, and it is based on a historical knowledge of a 10 loan processor inside the company, taking all their decisions and being able to predict their decision is a decision-making engine. Now, is it intelligence? Is it derived intelligence? Yeah, we have done that for analytical decisions for a long period of time, and we are okay with it. And I think that level of, I guess, advancements as well as access will likely change how fast we think and likely where we will put our brains to, ultimately rely on humans to do the decisions. Or maybe it will be one of those things where AI is constantly making the decisions for you and then you are approving or not approving it. So I think the idea of the agency is still with the humans. It's up to us to decide how we define AI decisions versus human decisions and agency.
Thanks so much for being on the show. We learned so much from you. For the viewers at home who want to learn a little bit more, what's like the best way to get in contact with you?
I am at the letter S at personal.ai. The company website is personal.ai. I'm most active on LinkedIn. I try to maintain one social channel. So Suman Kanuganti, LinkedIn. It's easy to find me.
Fantastic. And then for the viewers at home, stay curious.